Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something a little bit different than usual because in this video I'll be talking about this tiny little Sony Digicam right here. It is different because usually when I talk about compact cameras it's usually the bigger ones like the G16, G12, the LX100, the PowerShot Pro 1, things like that. So having this in my hand is just very different. And just to give you a little bit of a comparison, this is my wallet and this is the camera. The camera is not as tall as my wallet and almost as thin as my wallet. So, you know, it's definitely a very different feeling for me. It is not really a cheap feeling camera per se, but it's very light. So yeah, and the biggest selling point is the lens, and it's something that I'm really happy to talk about because it's actually quite a fun lens to use for a small compact camera from 2010. So in this video, it's not going to be a full review video, just going to be my personal thoughts and opinions based on how I use this camera. Hopefully it'll help you to make decisions on getting compact cameras in general. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So for the past couple of years, I've been seeing a lot of people buying into these little digicams or older compact cameras from early 2010s, early 2000s, late 90s, things like that. And you know, like, I do get the appeal, I do get the nostalgic look of it, like the appeal of it, why a lot of people would like it, and also, like, under certain lighting condition, you can get really artistic look with these cameras, and it's just a very nice and fun camera to use, especially when, you know, smartphones nowadays tend to take really good computational photography images. It's a mouthful to say, but yeah, they're just really good at taking multiple images with multiple exposures within just a matter of milliseconds and combine everything, and you just see the whole dynamic range from the detail of the bright sky to the detail of the darkest shadows out there. And yeah, to a certain extent, it just looks very unreal to a certain extent, and sometimes a lot of times it can be very practical, but that's about it. And using these cameras just gives that kind of fresh perspective and also gives that kind of character of grainy images or that pixelation that you don't really get with the super fine detail of modern day smartphone cameras. And using these cameras, even though it has like 14 megapixels, but because of how smaller the sensor is and also the processing power back then, the images are still going to be to a certain extent pixelated because these are small sensors squeezed with a lot of pixels, pretty much. So yeah, I do get that kind of appeal as well, and having used this camera for quite a while now, I do kind of enjoy that look to a certain extent, not always, and I do enjoy sometimes being able to see kind of like the fade out to the highlights rather than reserving all of the highlights or reserving all of the shadows. And that's quite contradicting because I find that when I'm shooting with compact cameras, you know, with the G16, G1X, with the LX100, I love having the ability to shoot RAW. I love the ability to always control at least 75 to 80% of my image output. So I will set my own ISO, I'll set my own aperture speed, and maybe, just maybe, let the camera set its own shutter speed. So I'll be in my aperture priority most of the time, or the rest of the time would be in manual mode rather than in kind of like shooting blind with full auto mode here on this camera. So yeah, but the auto mode on this camera is actually quite fun to use, and maybe fun is not the right word, but it does give you selections of like different scenes. So if you want to use high ISO scenes, or if you have your landscape scenes, or if you want to prioritize blurry background scene kind of thing, even though this camera actually doesn't blow your background super blurry, actually it doesn't make it blurry, especially with the sensor size. But yeah, there's that. It is such a nice and fun camera to use, and in this video I'll be splitting it to 3 different sections as usual as in my camera videos. So the first section will be about the ergonomics and the operational side of things, and then leading down into the image quality for both the photography and tiny bit of video. Again, this camera doesn't take good video, but again, if you're into these kind of older compact cameras, you might also be into the aesthetics of the videos of these older compact cameras as well, because there are also a lot of people who love those kind of look as well. Anyway, and then leading down into my conclusion. But anyway, let's first start with the first section, which is the ergonomics and the operational side of things. So this camera, as I mentioned earlier, it feels very light. I don't know, I still find it kind of weird that sometimes my wallet do feel a bit heavier than this camera, but you won't really notice it a lot when bringing this camera around. You can just fit it into your jeans pocket, no problem. Like, it doesn't feel like you're gonna break it anytime soon when you try to squish it. You know, these kind of cameras on the Casio compact cameras, when you squish it, it does dent in a lot. This one dents in a little bit, but not too extreme. So that's actually quite nice. And being such a small camera also means you have a very small battery in here, which can also be like kind of good and bad. Good being is that it's not heavy, but bad is that it's very unreliable when working in either extreme heat or kind of cold weather. And by extreme heat, I don't really mean like if you go to the desert or something, but just like European summer, that's already kind of like extreme heat for this kind of camera. Yeah, just like make the battery indicator fluctuates between 1 bar and 3 bars very, very easily. So sometimes you just shoot just 2 video segments and they're about 10 to 15 seconds per segment or per clips. And then from 3 bars, you can just see like, oh, you're at 1 bar now. But then when you're using the camera again in like 5 minutes time or even 3 minutes time, it's back to like 2 bars or 3 bars. So it's kind of unreliable, similar to GoPro batteries, but not as extreme. Well, the GoPro battery is not as extreme as this one when it comes to reliability, but they are still kind of unreliable. Anyway, back to this camera. On the back, you have this really usable, decent LCD screen. What I mean by decent is that you can kind of judge your focal length, your exposure on here, but the dynamic range of this particular, it's just not there. Like, you will see a lot of the washed out details and also just very unclear detail. It's very not sharp, and the edges has too much digital sharpening on the detail of this particular screen. I guess the extra digital sharpening is just trying to make up for the fact that the screen is not that sharp. But then again, this is a very old screen and it's also a very cheap screen. You can actually see the pixels on here. So yeah, but again, if you're using it just to, you know, judge your composition, it's definitely more than good enough. And you will start seeing more details later on when you actually put your pictures onto the computer and just look through different images, see which one you want to select, things like that. You don't want to go and select your final images based on the screens at the back here. You can take a bunch of images, but don't go and select your final images from the screen here right away, because you will be able to see more details and you will be able to see better colors, better judgments of the entire image later on a better computer screen. So yeah, there is that. These control dials here, well, like, they look crammed together, and they are, but you're not going to really be pressing it by accident. I have a medium-sized hand, I think, and I don't really press on them that easily. Like, you have to force it in a little bit, and it will give you this very nice tactile feeling. The only downside is that I find that the on-off button is a bit too flushed down. So sometimes you want to turn on the camera and it doesn't really turn on right away, just like that. You have to kind of, yeah, really press it deliberately. I guess it actually helps to kind of mitigate or just omit those accidental on-off presses, which is good, but in the same time, you're actually going to be missing capturing that moment quite often. So I experience a lot of times when I actually, you know, start to take this camera out, do some street photography, maybe in the city, and I see a moment about to happen, and I just grab this camera and then just turn it on. The logo shows, and then now it's saying accessing, which means it's accessing the memory card, and now the accessing label is gone. So it takes a bit of time to actually get the camera ready so that you can actually take the photo. So don't rely on this camera as the camera to always capture that perfect moment or near perfect moment, if I can say. You have to spare a few seconds in advance, and that can be a deal breaker to a lot of people, because there are a lot of cameras out there, especially compact cameras as well, that just turns on and take pictures right away, whereas this one you just have to wait a few extra seconds before you are able to take pictures. But again, this camera, it has 26mm wide angle lens, which is something that I really like. And for a compact camera from 2010 that generally starts at around either between 28 to 35mm of their wide angle lens, and this camera, I would pick this camera because of the 26mm focal range. It is wide. Like, usually premium compact cameras at the time starts between 26 and 24. So for such a cheap entry-level compact camera, you're getting kind of like that field of view of a more premium compact camera. So that's actually quite good in such a light body. The lens itself is not super sharp. It's just on par with all the other good compact digital cameras at the time, which is not bad. It's just decent. You know, you will still see a bit of chromatic aberration and color fringing, of course, when shooting with really high contrasted areas. But of course, I don't think a lot of people will be caring about that. I think a lot of people will actually appreciate the chromatic aberration, the color fringing of the lens when using older digicams nowadays, because it just adds to the digicam look. So yeah, there's that. But otherwise, everything is very nice, very user-friendly, and you can actually access the menu very easily, and the menu itself is also quite fast to navigate through and also quite nicely organized, though, because there are not a lot of features. You can just go through the menu, through the essential settings very easily. So yeah, there's that, and that's something that I really appreciate, and also part of the reason what makes this camera so fun to use, because everything is just pretty much in your face and you can just access everything very quickly. So yeah, there's that. But otherwise, the autofocusing system on this camera is decent. If you're used to compact cameras from back then, it's just kind of on par with that. If you're used to your smartphone's autofocusing system, then it is much slower. This camera takes a bit of time to focus compared to your smartphones, because it's just kind of like making sure that, okay, it's really in focus. Just okay, the contrast is there. Okay, yep, now it's in focus. So you're just kind of getting that. But if you're used to, again, you know, compact cameras from back then, it's really the same, focusing time-wise. So yeah, there's that. Now on to the image quality. The image quality on this camera is okay. It's 14 megapixels, although I really wish that it would be around 10 megapixels. I understand back then, the higher the number, the better. Well, it is still somewhat like that nowadays as well. But what I mean by smaller pixels, or smaller resolution, is because the sensor in this camera is so small, I wish that they would trade in the megapixels so that the pixels would be a bit bigger, therefore this camera would be better in low light. So sometimes when I'm just shooting indoor on like a bright sunny day, I would already start seeing noise, and it's just a little bit weird seeing noise and pixelation, because 14 megapixels on such a tiny sensor, it's a lot of pixels squashed together. If you just imagine like a room full of buckets that is trying to take in the water, like the raindrops. If the room has a lot of small buckets inside, each bucket can only capture so much of the water. Whereas if you take away a lot of the buckets, still have the same space area of the room, but the buckets are now bigger, that's filling the room, then the individual buckets are able to capture more raindrops. Same thing with the pixels. If the pixels were bigger, it's going to be able to capture light better. Therefore, there would be less pixelations, and also the camera would be able to deal better in low lighting situations as well, because the pixels are not as squished together. They're still squished together, but like it's going to be a bigger pixel that actually captures more light. So yeah, there's that. I just wish that instead of 14, they would just have like 10 megapixels maybe, around that, because this camera really suffers a lot in low light. But in normal lighting condition, whether it's indoor or outdoor, I think if you're into the older nostalgic kind of digicam look, then this camera won't disappoint at all. And also if you're into post-processing a little bit, just the super basic stuff, then this camera, like, it does deliver robust enough file for you to just do a bit of like boost and contrast, and also a bit of highlight and shadow enhancements, just a tiny bit. And maybe then you can also trade in some of the resolution for some of the denoising, if you're that kind of person, which sometimes I admit I am when using such cameras that have too much pixelation for me. But yeah, there is that. Otherwise, the moire and aliasing on this camera is very real. It does show quite often, so be careful when you're shooting with fine pattern details. So yeah, just to keep that in mind. And also, if you're shooting outdoors, it will actually try to overexpose your image by a little bit, then underexpose your image. So your details on the shadows will tend to be more of a camera's priority than the highlights. So choose your scene modes or your scene settings wisely, and just get used to it on which one you want to preserve more and which one matters to you more. So yeah, there is that. But otherwise, I think that the image quality is actually pretty good. Like, if you can actually get over the fact that there is more in aliasing, and get over the limitations of certain environments where it can be a bit pixelated or just a bit overexposed, I think it just really needs like time to get used to, you know. It's not a camera where you can just set everything to your liking, but it's a camera that if you get used to it, you will be able to find nice moments that you can actually capture the good results with this camera. So yeah, there's that. And onto the video side of things, the video on this camera, all the flaws that you get with the photo side is more pronounced in video. So the moire, the aliasing, the digital sharpening, it's just going to be much worse in video. It's only like a VGA quality on here, so it's just not much to talk about. And the lack of IS, although I'm not really expecting IS in such, you know, a small body from 2010, and especially an entry-level one as well. So yeah, the IS is definitely not there. So when you zoom in, just be careful. But I do know people who really love the jittery kind of look, the look with also a lot of sharpening, digital sharpening in the video as well. So it just gives a very nostalgic aesthetics for those people. Yeah, I totally understand. But for me, it's, yeah, not something that I would want to take videos with. But anyway, now into the conclusion. This camera is a fun camera to use, and overall it is a camera that I personally really enjoy using because it is such a simple camera. It does have a lot of the limitations, as I mentioned earlier, but in the same time, if you're used to that, and of course if you don't have a lot of expectations out of it, you will come up with a lot of really artistic results as well, because the lighting with this camera you can really play around with. The fact that the camera captures the images in a kind of more interesting lighting way, it does allow a lot of room that you can actually grow with the camera as well, and also just think of different artistic projects you could actually do with this camera. So that's actually pretty good. And even though, you know, I complain about it having a bit too much megapixel for the sensor size, but generally speaking, the details are there. So you can actually live with the detail, assuming the lighting condition is good enough. So yeah, there's that. Overall, if you're into this kind of like smaller compact cameras, not only this particular model, but just this kind of compact cameras in general, I still recommend you trying it, because it is a camera or a tool that allows you to actually open up your creativity in a very different field. I know it does sound cheesy, but like, you know, my My small setup would be, let's say, my A7 IV that's filming me with the 20mm f1.8, or my R5 with the 15 to 35 f2.8. Those are what I call my small setup. That's small to me. And being able to, you know, use this camera for the past few months, just going around and having a different form factor, and just to a large extent let the camera also decide on the exposure, the ISO, everything for me, although it was kind of insecure feeling in a lot of cases. It is still fun in its own way. So yeah, in that case, just give it a go and see if you like it or not. But overall, I think it's an experience that you should definitely try. And it's also, you know, it's such a tiny little camera that you can just take it anywhere with you. So yeah, there's that. Not wanting to make the video any longer, I thank you all very much for watching. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free on my website. Just click the link down in the description section below. So as some of my free photography video guides, as well as some of the paid ones as well. If you have any questions, any suggestions, feel free to also leave that down in the comment section below as well. Otherwise, I thank you very much for watching. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.